It was an evening like any other when my husband, Daniel, told me that we were going out to dinner that night with one of his friends. It didn't seem strange to me at the time, as he used to organize outings with his friends from time to time. However, there was something in his tone that made me uneasy. Before continuing the story, I ask you for a second to give a like to the video. It doesn't bother you at all, and it helps me a lot. Let's continue. Sophia, tonight will be a little different, he said with an enigmatic smile as he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. Different how? I asked, frowning. Daniel avoided my gaze as he put on his coat. Just trust me, okay? Tonight will be special. Although I was intrigued, I decided not to insist. During our years of marriage, I had learned that sometimes Daniel had surprises in store for me, and most of the time they ended up being pleasant. But that sense of something more, something hidden, didn't go away. When we arrived at the restaurant, I saw that his friend Miguel was already seated at a table in a secluded corner. He smiled warmly at me as we approached, and I immediately noticed the camaraderie between the two men. Miguel had always been close to Daniel, but the three of us had never spent much time together. We sat down, and after a few minutes of small talk, I noticed Daniel and Miguel exchanging glances that made me nervous. There was something in their gestures, in their unspoken words, that made me feel as if I was out of place, as if they knew something I didn't know. Finally, after a toast and a couple of glasses of wine, Daniel looked me straight in the eye and dropped the bombshell. Sophia, tonight we want to propose something to you, something out of the ordinary. I felt as if the world stopped for a moment. I looked at Daniel, then at Miguel, hoping for some kind of joke, something that would clarify the situation. But both men looked at me seriously, with no trace of humor in their expressions. What are you saying, Daniel? I asked, my voice louder than I intended. What exactly is it that you want to propose? Daniel took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to continue. You know I love you, Sophia, and I trust you completely. But I've been thinking about our relationship, about how we could explore something new. I want you to consider sharing an intimate experience with Miguel and me. The shock hit me like a gust of cold wind. If you like the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks. I looked at Miguel, waiting for some sign that he didn't agree with Daniel's proposal, but his expression was equally calm, as if he was completely on board with the idea. Are you crazy? I exclaimed, feeling the anger start to grow inside me. Do you really think I'll agree to something like that? Daniel grabbed my hand. His eyes reflected concern. Sophia, I don't want you to feel pressured. I just want you to consider it. Miguel is someone I trust completely, and I thought it might be something that would bring us even closer. Confusion and anger swirled inside me. How could I even suggest something like that? I felt betrayed, as if I didn't know the man I had married. But at the same time, there was something in his tone, in the way he was asking me, that made me hesitate. I knew Daniel wouldn't do anything to hurt me, but this seemed too much. For the next few minutes, I barely paid attention to the conversation between Daniel and Miguel. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. Did my husband really expect me to agree to something so outlandish, or was there something else I wasn't understanding? How could you ask this of me? I finally asked, interrupting the light chatter between them. Daniel sighed and leaned toward me. Sophia, I want you to know that this is not a decision I made lightly. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I don't want you to see it as something negative. I love you, and I want to share everything with you, even my fantasies. The words fantasies echoed in my mind. Was this really just a fantasy? A way to explore something different without it meaning our marriage was in trouble? Doubts began to build up in my head. I had always trusted Daniel and knew he would never do anything to hurt us. But this situation seemed so foreign to who we were as a couple. Miguel, who until then had remained silent, spoke in a calm voice. Sophia, I understand this is a lot to process. You don't have to decide anything now. I just wanted you to know that there is no pressure and that we will only do what you feel comfortable doing. Her tone was understanding, almost gentle, but that didn't make the situation any less strange. I felt caught between loyalty to my husband and bewilderment at what he was asking of me. How could I even consider such a thing? But as I sat there watching the two men, I began to notice something inside me that I had not expected. A small spark of curiosity. What if I really considered it? If I decided to put aside my fears and explore what Daniel is suggesting? The minutes passed slowly, and each sip of wine seemed to calm the storm of emotions inside me a little. The initial anger had faded, leaving a void that was quickly filled by unanswered questions. I looked at Daniel, trying to find some sign of regret in his eyes. But all I saw was a mixture of love and hope. Do you really think this is something that will bring us closer? I asked quietly, almost dreading the answer. Danielle nodded slowly. I believe it, Sophia. I think this could be a way for us to connect in a new way, to explore something we might both enjoy. Her words surprised me. Enjoy? I had never thought of this kind of situation as something I might enjoy. I had always been a faithful woman, completely devoted to my husband, but now he was asking me to consider something that went against everything I had known up to that point. I felt Daniel's hand on mine, a familiar gesture that had always soothed me in the past. I don't want you to see it as an obligation, he told me softly. If at any time you feel uncomfortable, we won't do anything. But I want you to know that I trust you, and I want you to trust me. Miguel leaned forward, his expression serious but calm. Sophia, I completely respect your boundaries as well. If this is not something you want, no problem. The last thing I want is for you to feel pressured. His words, though well-intentioned, didn't make the situation any easier. I was at a crossroads, with a decision that could change the dynamics of my relationship with Daniel forever. I should either accept his proposal and see how far this new path would take me, or should I follow my initial instincts and reject him completely? As these questions were going through my mind, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of excitement and fear. What would I do? What did I really want? Finally, after a long silence, I made a decision. I'm not sure what I want, I admitted, my voice trembling. But if this is something you really want, Daniel, I'm willing to consider it. I felt a palpable relief in the air when I uttered those words. Daniel smiled at me, a gesture full of gratitude as Miguel looked at me with respect. But even though I had said I would consider it, I still felt a great uncertainty about what would actually happen that night. After my statement, the atmosphere changed. It was no longer tense, but it was still somewhat uncomfortable, as if I was trapped in a situation I still didn't fully understand. Daniel, clearly relieved by my willingness to consider his proposal, gently stroked my hand, while Miguel, always respectful, did nothing but smile kindly. The conversation slowly resumed, but I could hardly concentrate on what they were saying. My mind wandered between doubts, fears, and a small spark of curiosity that I could not extinguish. With each passing minute, I felt a part of me drifting away from what was familiar, from what our relationship had always been. Was I really willing to embark on something so radical? When dinner was over, Daniel suggested we go to a nearby bar for some more drinks. I hesitated for a second, but then nodded. I knew I could no longer run away from what was to come. As we walked to the bar, the two men chatted casually, as if they hadn't just proposed something to me that could change our relationship forever. When we arrived at the bar, Daniel chose a private table in a dark corner. The intimate atmosphere made me even more nervous, but I tried hard to remain calm. We're just having a few drinks, I kept telling myself, but I knew there was more at stake. We sat down, and Daniel ordered a bottle of wine. The alcohol, which normally relaxed me, now only intensified my emotions. With each sip, I felt my resistance barrier weaken as my thoughts raced out of control. I knew the time to face the situation was approaching, and although I was still unsure, a part of me was beginning to accept that there was no turning back. After a few drinks, it was Miguel who finally broke the silence. Sophia, if at any time you feel uncomfortable, don't hesitate to say so. We don't want this to be something that causes you discomfort. His words were kind, but only served to remind me of what was about to happen. I looked at Daniel, looking for a sign that this was the right thing to do, but he simply returned my gaze with that same mixture of love and expectation. I know, I replied in a firm voice, although inside I was trembling. I'm ready to move forward, but I want us to go slowly. I don't want to feel pressured. Daniel nodded, while Miguel watched me with a respectful expression. Of course, Sophia, Daniel said gently. We will take everything at your pace. Time seemed to stand still as the three of us sat at that table, each lost in our own thoughts. I felt Daniel's hand on mine again, and this time, instead of rejecting his touch, I accepted it. After all, he was my husband, and I trusted him. The conversation flowed lighter from there. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe the fact that I had already made up my mind, but I began to feel more relaxed, as if somehow this wasn't as strange as I had initially thought. Miguel, for his part, remained discreet but present, participating in the conversation in a casual way, without pushing at any time. Little by little, I began to see him not as the third party but as someone Daniel really valued. Someone who, somehow, was also willing to respect my boundaries and my feelings. When we finally got up to leave, I felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation. I knew the most difficult moment was coming, but surprisingly, I didn't feel the same panic as I did at the beginning. It was as if a part of me had already accepted what was going to happen. As we left the bar, Daniel suggested that we go to our apartment. There was no resistance from me. I knew we were moving into something unknown, but for some reason, it didn't scare me as much as it had before. Throughout our relationship, Daniel had always been a reliable partner, someone who would never intentionally hurt me. And that trust, as strange as it seemed, helped me cope. When we got home, the atmosphere became more intimate, more personal. Daniel lit some candles, creating a relaxed atmosphere. I sat down on the couch and both he and Miguel sat next to me, letting the atmosphere speak for itself. Remember, Sophia, this is only if you want it, Daniel said softly. As if reading my thoughts, I took a deep breath looking at them both. I knew that no matter what happened next, our relationship would no longer be the same. But I also knew that there was something pushing me to explore this new territory, something I couldn't ignore. Finally, I nodded. I'm ready, I said, my voice firmer than I felt inside. But as I said before, let's take it slow. The next few hours were a mix of intense emotions, confusion, and surprisingly, connection. Although at first I had been afraid of what might happen, I soon realized that this was not an act of betrayal, but a different way of getting closer, of exploring something we had never considered before. Miguel, true to his word, was respectful at all times, and Daniel was by my side, making sure I felt comfortable and in control. Although the situation was still strange, a part of me began to relax, to let go of what was happening. When it was finally over, I felt a mixture of relief and peace. I knew that what we had done was unconventional, but it wasn't something I regretted either. Somehow, this had brought the three of us closer together, creating a connection I hadn't expected. Daniel hugged me tightly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had crossed a barrier that had brought us even closer as a couple. When I awoke the next morning, the sun was already filtering through the curtains, filling the room with soft light. Next to me, Daniel was sleeping peacefully, with a peaceful expression on his face. I still couldn't believe everything that had happened the night before, but, surprisingly, I wasn't overwhelmed with guilt or regret. I carefully got up, leaving Daniel to continue sleeping, and made my way to the kitchen. As I brewed coffee, my mind kept going over the events. How I had come to accept something that, under other circumstances, would have seemed unthinkable. And the most surprising thing was that I felt good, as if I had crossed a line that was not necessarily negative but liberating. Miguel had already left, leaving Daniel and me in our intimacy. I knew there would be moments of doubts and questions, but right now what I felt most was a strange sense of complicity with Daniel. We had shared everything, no secrets, and it had strengthened our relationship in a way I could never have imagined. Daniel woke up soon after and found me in the kitchen, with 2 cups of coffee already ready. He came over, gave me a soft kiss on the forehead, and sat down next to me quietly. I knew we needed to talk, but we were both waiting for the right moment. How are you feeling? He finally asked me, with a mixture of curiosity and concern in his voice. I'm fine, I replied, surprised at how sincere I felt in saying it. At first I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, but now I think it was an experience we needed. Daniel nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. I wanted this to be something that would bring us closer together, not drive us apart. But I was always ready to accept whatever decision you made. I smiled at him, grateful for his understanding. I know your intentions were always good, even if it was hard for me to understand at first. I'm glad we talked openly about all this. We stood in silence for a few minutes, enjoying our coffee and the quiet of the morning. I knew this was just the beginning of a new phase in our relationship, one that would require a lot of communication and mutual understanding. But I also knew we were ready to face it together. As the days passed, we slowly returned to our usual routine. However, something had changed. The connection between Daniel and me was stronger than before. And although we didn't talk openly about it all the time, we knew we were in a different place in our relationship. One afternoon, as we were walking in the park, Daniel casually brought up the subject. "Have you regretted what we did?" he asked, looking into my eyes with a mixture of sincerity and concern. I thought about it for a second, but the answer was already clear in my mind. No, I don't regret it. In fact, I think it was an experience that helped us understand each other better. But I think we need to be careful how we move forward. He felt showing agreement. I don't want this to be something that jeopardizes our relationship. I just want us to keep exploring what makes us feel good, always with respect and love. I felt a surge of relief at his words. We were on the same page. And that was the most important thing. It wasn't just about the acts themselves, but how we connected emotionally through them. And as long as that connection remained strong, I knew we could overcome any challenge that came our way. Over time, the idea of the triangle became something we could discuss openly, without shame or guilt. Although we hadn't repeated the experience since that first time, we both knew it wasn't something ruled out, but something that could come up again in the future. If the circumstances were right, Daniel and I began to talk more openly about our fantasies and desires, something we had previously kept on the back burner. This new level of communication allowed us to grow as a couple and strengthen our relationship in ways we had never imagined. One day, while we were at home, Daniel casually mentioned the possibility of inviting Miguel back for dinner. "It doesn't have to be anything else," he quickly clarified, seeing my surprised expression. "I just think it would be good for us to keep in touch. I don't want you to feel like that was something we should hide or avoid." I thought about it for a moment and realized I was right. Miguel had been part of an experience that had brought us closer together, and there was no reason to avoid it. "All right," I finally replied. "We can invite him to dinner, but I want to keep everything going at our own pace." Daniel smiled, grateful for my answer. "That's all I want, that we keep exploring what makes us happy always at our own pace." The night of dinner with Miguel arrived, and although I felt nervous at first, I soon realized that there was nothing to worry about. The evening was pleasant, full of laughter and conversation, without any pressure or expectation. As the evening progressed, I became more comfortable with the idea of this being part of our new reality. When Miguel left, Daniel hugged me and whispered in my ear, "No matter what you decide, I will always be by your side." Those words echoed in my heart. I knew that no matter what the future held for us, we would face it together. Whether it was to continue to explore a new facet of our relationship or simply return to what we had been before, the most important thing was that we would do it as a team with love and respect. And so, with the certainty that we were building something strong and authentic, I surrendered to the possibility of an uncertain future, but one filled with trust and connection with the man I loved. The story is over now, but if you want to hear other stories of secrets and lies, click on one of the videos you see on the screen, and remember to subscribe to the channel to receive new stories every day.